Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Better You podcast brought to you by Lamco Wellness. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Um, Today, we're talking about empathy, and I think this is a really important conversation to have because there's a lot of different takes on empathy going on out there. Me personally, and I could be wrong, so please correct me, Dr. Tilden, if I am wrong, but I sort of view empathy as a skill. Like it's something that you can develop, and it's basically, can you understand what somebody's going through? Can you put yourself in their shoes without necessarily you losing yourself in what's going on with them?
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make about something you develop because there's some controversy about whether it can be learned or like you either have it or you don't. I'm from the mindset that I think it's innate, you know, and like, or maybe you have it, and then if you have like adverse childhood experiences and stuff like that, maybe you would not have it anymore. It would decrease your ability to have empathy. Um, but yeah, I mean, there are people who I guess are over empathetic, maybe, and then like you said, like kind of start to lose themselves. Um, and I do think that someone who doesn't have it could kind of watch other people and mimic what they say in certain situations so it appears that they're empathetic. Like, like offering condolences or, I don't know, saying sorry or other things like that. Like, I'm sorry you're going through this when they're just kind of mimicking what they see other people do.
See, that's. Oh, go ahead, Robbie.
No, 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 please. This is a very interesting topic. I'm excited for this. But no, please go for it. I'll chime in afterwards.
That's something. So for me, for like my own story, I am rarely initially empathetic, which is very problematic when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're telling me about their hardships, because it doesn't, like, because of the neurodivergence, everything registers with me on a delay, and it doesn't click with me. And I'm sure because I'm sure Robbie's heard me go, "Oh, that sucks," but that's like my go-to. Hey, I hear you, and I want to rec recognize that what you're going through is terrible, but like it doesn't click for me for sometimes, hours or even a whole day later. But it does, like, eventually click if I try to put myself there. Um, but at the same time, because it doesn't click initially, there can be like really bad things that somebody's telling me about. And if I'm not actively pursuing trying to understand it and trying to get it to click, it won't. Like it'll just be like, okay, that sucks, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm sort of in the middle with you. Like I do believe just because of the neurodivergence, empathy is a harder thing for me. But it's
Mhm.
also something that I've practiced and gotten progressively better at, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Um, I think that empathy is, I mean, it's really important. And I don't want to say skill, but it's important to have it. For numerous reasons, people, some of the psychological disorders where people lack empathy, like more the personality disorders, um,
Mhm.
you know, it's in a lot of the personality disorders, and it does not, because they can't identify with what someone's going through. They come off like it's cold, and sometimes that's calculated, sometimes not, but they it definitely affects their interpersonal relationships. And like antisocial personality disorder, let's just take that. um no empathy is, maybe, they're committing crimes and they can't connect to their victims at all. Like they don't realize that they're like traumatizing the people they held up, in an armed robbery or something, because they have no empathy. So they tend to think, like, well, just about themselves and not be empathetic about what they could be doing to somebody else.
I feel like there's a big difference between being cognitive empathetic and emotionally empathetic. And then that's where I stand, where I've gotten better, right? As a progressive skill that I've gotten better at, which is cognitive empathy. But emotionally, I sometimes just like not able to feel like what they are feeling. And even sometimes the cognitive empathy is forced. But I think that comes from a culture background of like, okay, I see someone going through hardships where I've seen, my parents gone through the same hardships. So I'm like, okay, cool. Nice, move on, sorry in the moment. But yeah, so I think my cognitive empathy has gotten a lot better rather than emotionally where it's just not there for some reason.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I'm sorry. I think you make a great point for looking at different cultural expressions of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
There's some cultures where you wouldn't come out and say like, oh, I'm so sorry. I know you're going through a hard time, but maybe you might show empathy by like bringing food to their house or helping them out, some other way.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important to remember culturally that there are differences in the way it's expressed.
Yeah.
I think also, at least for me, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but for me, there's like there's certain levels of emotional empathy that I just can't achieve until I go through something similar myself. And like the biggest example I can give you is I've had at least a half dozen friends lose their parents to cancer in my life. And I was always like, man, that's really gotta suck. I'm sorry, I understand that you're really sad. And then I lost my mom to cancer, and I called them back up, at least the ones that I was still, in contact with, and was just like, hey, I feel like I owe you an apology because I did not understand, the emotional impact of this moment when I was talking to you before about it. And now, like, if that happens to friends or family, I'm like, oh, yep, that's a really rough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, but I think that for me at least, and I think it does apply to a lot of people, I don't know, but there's just some level of emotional engagement that maybe your body prevents you from getting to without already being there, just because it kind of sucks to go through it. Um, but I think it is. This sounds really terrible, but I think in a sense it is good for all of us to go through a certain level of emotional hardship just so that we can be more empathetic and we can relate to the trials and tribulations of others that we maybe couldn't before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Robbie.
I was gonna say I feel like your surroundings also matter, right? Or like if you've grown up around people who are just like overly empathetic or just like overly like backed off when the situation of like emotional like empathy comes in. So I think that's such a big difference of like, okay, who you are today is not going to be the same who we were prior, right? Like the skill that you mentioned, like it's a progressive skill that you built on, and that comes with your surroundings as well.
I agree. Say if you grow up in a family where you're physically abused or, sexually, emotionally, whatever kind of abuse it is. And like maybe like your parents don't show you very much affection or say, I love you, or they're just very cold or neglectful, whatever. That I think would erode your ability to feel empathy because you didn't, what can be learned, with the part that can be learned, you didn't learn it. You had no role models to show you this is how you act or what you say or when someone goes through this, and you can try to feel kind of like relate to what they're feeling.
Yeah.
I would almost go so far as to say, in the case of an abusive upbringing, it's the opposite. Like, you learn to not be empathetic because that can be used against you, and that can make your experience that much worse. So
Mhm.
if you learn to just focus on your own survival, then that includes not worrying about other people.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, it almost develops the opposite skill.
Okay.
But
Oh,
again, I don't know anything.
Yeah,
uh,
I think these are two different sides that are really interesting to discuss. It's important to talk about, I think.
I have something to bring up. When you're in an airplane and they have the audio or the host like playing, where like if the masks drop, like put yourself first and then
Mhm.
others. So in this empathy sense, right? You see someone struggling, what would you do, right? Are your morals are gonna come into play first, or what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Eric.
I feel like that's a misuse of empathy. Like, the reason that you're supposed to put your own mask on first is because you can't help anybody if you haven't helped yourself first. And like, logically, that's how the steps go. But I think, like, I actually had this conversation with my partner. She's, I would say, overly empathetic, but it's also one of the things I very much love about her. But like, she was absolutely the person that was like, no, I would put it on you first. And I'm like, don't do that. Put it on you first, and then if I'm dying, you can take care of me.
Right. Well, I think, with the, I guess this is a little bit off topic, but with the situation with, if someone has a little kid with them, then you're modeling like, oh, it's okay to do this, so they don't, freak out. And, if they had a, if you try to help them put it on first, they might be scared. But if you do it yourself, then they're,
Yeah,
can relate maybe, or model what you're doing.
that makes a lot of sense too.
But yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
I feel like it's empathy, like a lot of things, it's so easy to go too far. I wouldn't say it's easy. There are a lot of us who could use a lot more empathy,
Right.
but there are some people, and my partner is absolutely one of them, who just seem to innately feel and care about so many more things than others do. And like, at times it's amazing because they can, like, she makes friends with everybody. Everybody loves her. Everybody would do, anything for her. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. Um, but at times, like, her best friend just recently lost somebody, and she was up half the night just being like, "Oh, I can't imagine how she's feeling right now, and that's got to be so hard and everything." And I was like, "Oh, see, this is an example of empathy going too far, where it's starting to impact your own life."
Yeah, I agree. That some people, it can be, they take on what the person is going through almost themselves, and like maybe they can't sleep, or they're crying all the time because this person lost someone, or you know, trying, like, relating almost overly. I don't say overly relate, but it just, they have like a very visceral response to what someone's going through, and then they start, like, maybe lose sight of, maybe you could be more helpful to this person, like, in other ways, rather than, kind of joining them in their sorrow.
Yeah, yeah,
And then, people are always like, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? And it can be kind of hard to distinguish those. I don't know if I have a great definition right now. But yeah, I mean, empathy, I think, is more feeling, um, relating to what someone's going through, while sympathy is expressing, like, sorrow for what they're going through. If
mhm.
that's a good distinction or not, I don't know.
Yeah. No, no, no. I think so. That also, for whatever reason, it doesn't connect directly, but I also think that it's very interesting that empathy isn't something that we're born with. Like when you're a kid, when you're very young, zero empathy. You're just like I've seen dozens of kids and they're all like me, but then they eventually develop that ability to understand other people um, to some extent. And to me, I think that I don't know why, I don't know why people develop it to different extremes or different levels. I've talked about this before, but I'm about to be a father, so I'm constantly like, what is this? What's the impact going to have on my kid? Um, but I do think it's interesting because I've seen kids develop empathy really young, where they're really caring very young. Um, Usually second born kids or kids with an older sibling
Mhm.
is what I've seen. No actual research data, so please don't take it as fact.
Yeah.
But then I've also seen kids where they're you know into their tweens and teens and they're still really struggling to understand that other people have, you know, feelings and emotions as complex as them.
Yeah, well, I think brain development really plays a big role in this because, when kids are little, they're not able to either express it or maybe understand it because their brain just isn't developed as much as, late, like then say, like when they're a teenager, the example you just gave, um, that maybe they're still not the most empathetic person in the world. But I think also some of that is, when people are adolescents, they tend to be a little self involved and really worried what everyone thinks about them, and it's like everyone's looking at me, and it can be like that. So it doesn't really their development kind of interferes a little bit, I think, with their ability to be more empathetic.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense because my empathy shot way down during adolescence.
Right, right. Yeah,
Do you guys show empathy towards your pets? Like over empathize where like you leave
yes.
them and you can be like, oh, like he or she cannot be left alone, they need to be.
Too much.
Yeah, I apologize. Like every time I'm walking out of my house, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'll be back in a little bit. I'm like, don't look back, because I'll see his face, and I'll feel even worse about leaving.
uh,
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
huh.
And
my
really, I
dogs.
was told that dogs don't have any sense of time. Like how
Yeah.
I figured that
Mm.
out, I'm not really sure, but that they don't. So they don't know if you're gone 5 minutes or 5 hours.
And then, so with that said, right, do you think that was something that developed when you got the pet, or that was instilled when you were young because you had a pet, or your parents had a pet, and then
Like the latter.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, like, I think it's actually important for people to have, for kids to grow up like with pets, if their family's able to, like, have the resources to give the pet a good home and all that stuff. Um, because they learn to be like kind to other, I mean, not only to animals, but like to also be kind to other people, and develop empathy, and have a sense of personal responsibility and all that other stuff that goes along with caring for someone else or a pet.
no,
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I have two very young nieces who like they learn to be gentle with their movements and actions because they have cats.
Mhm.
Um, and cat will let you know if you're not being gentle with it.
Yeah, they'll let you know. They're not shy.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think going back to the discussion of skill, not a skill, I definitely feel like it falls to me it falls a little bit to both because there's definitely like a developmental aspect of it. There's as you were talking about, a brain development aspect to it. Um, but I do feel like it's something that you can exercise or even over exercise to the point of being better at it or worse at it or go too far or whatever. Um, but one of the things, that's just my own opinion, but one of the things I did want to talk about is this concept of ruinous empathy, which it's very popular in business circles. I don't know how popular it is uh, elsewhere, but this idea of like, hey, you're doing somebody a disservice because you're trying to save them some grief now.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Is that, from a clinical perspective, is that something that comes up a lot of you know hey, this is something uh that I'm avoiding doing that maybe needs to be done, or maybe it doesn't need to be done because I don't want to cause somebody pain.
That's interesting. I'm not really familiar with that the, with that concept, but I would say that um, you know take if you're empathetic, like maybe overly empathetic to someone to the point where like it's causing them to have like an emotional distress or something along those lines, then yeah, that's something that should be avoided. Some people can't avoid it though. We're going back to like, is it innate or skill or whatever. And then there's the people who, because they like overly relate, then it's kind of like making it about themselves instead of continuing to have empathy for someone else, because they're like, oh, I can relate, and this is how I can relate, and telling like stories about themselves and stuff, when it's like it's not about them, it's about the other person, and just showing them like, you know I imagine it's really difficult what you're going through, instead of being like, oh, I know how you feel because this happened to me and this is how I dealt with it and all that stuff. Kind of doing the reverse.
Well, Aaron, let me
I
ask you
feel like
this. No, I was gonna say,
okay.
let me ask you this in regards to, is like, I feel like it's also dependent on the situation, right? Like, do you have an example of like how a positive situation or a negative situation, like how this ruinous empathy can play into factor?
It's a good question.
Well, like the basically what it is as a concept is somebody is doing something wrong and they're feeling like they're doing something right. And because you don't want them to experience the pain of essentially being scolded for doing something wrong, you avoid that topic or you sugarcoat how wrong it is.
Mm.
And because of that, they continue to do it and they develop worse and worse habit. It's essentially, to me, it's a form of
A form of what?
enablement.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I would tend to agree that that would that's enabling someone to continue their bad behavior. Um, yeah, I think if yeah, you are doing them a disservice, because that saying like the business environment, that's going to lead to them maybe not being as successful in their career as they might be otherwise had someone told them a long time ago, like, that's wrong. Probably in nicer words than I just said, but and like this is the right way to do it, and kind of mentoring them in terms of like this is how you're supposed to do this. So yeah, that could be a total disservice to someone, in the personal life and in the professional life, I think.
yeah, I think to me, and it's very important to separate or include accountability with empathy
Mhm.
and be able to not say, oh, I'm being empathetic to this person, so I'm going to excuse behavior or whatever. I think the best example to that I can think of, and it's uh, potentially controversial, is uh, disabled people. Like I've known a few, and some of them are basically like, "Hey, I'm disabled. You need to do everything for me," and some of them are like, "Treat me like a person."
Mhm.
And I tend to very much favor the latter rather than the former because I feel like if you expect everybody to do everything for you, and there are things that you should be able to develop the skill to do yourself,
Mhm.
you're kind of a jerk, you know?
Well, I mean, how are you really helping them in like either maybe their view of themselves or how they interact with the world? Because that could lead to like learned helplessness. For instance, if you're doing everything for someone and then they finally just are like,
I can't do anything.
I can't do it. I don't need to do it. And then when something new comes up, they'll be like, well, I couldn't possibly do that because everyone's been doing something for them.
Yeah.
So-
I do think it's so, like, one of the things that always interests me is how easy it is for us as people just in general to fall into patterns. Like,
Mhm.
we'll fall into this pattern of getting up every day and immediately checking our phone and start doom scrolling. We don't recognize, hey, this is something that we're doing that's having an effect on us, and it's also something that we could stop doing, or change. And I think that, like, especially in the case of ruinous empathy, and in the case of talking about disabled people, I think that that's a big one as well, because like I've met and seen people where, they go through an accident, or things get tough for them and everything gets taken care of for them, and then they never recover because, you know, everything got taken care of for them. They didn't have to develop that skill to be self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Um, so I think, sorry, I'm going all over the place with this, but I think that with empathy, we have to tie some level of accountability to it. Like, you know, hey, I recently lost a loved one and it was very tragic and sudden, or whatever, but I can't be, excused from living the rest of the aspects of my life and from putting down all of my responsibility indefinitely.
Mhm.
And I think that's hard for a lot of people to do. It's occasionally hard for me to do, especially if it's somebody I care a lot about. Like, I just want to take care of them, you know? Um, but there are definitely points where I think, and this is just my opinion, that you're not doing anybody any favors by making things easier for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people learn through behaving in a certain way. And like, if that doesn't work out, there's a failure of some kind, then hopefully they learn from that and then they change their behavior in the future. So if they're not getting that opportunity to maybe fail at something or have it not go well, then they're losing the opportunity to learn either skills or about themselves or, a lot of things.
Yeah.
They don't have the opportunity when the opportunity is what promotes personal growth or professional growth.
Dr. Tilton, do you find yourself in a position when you are there's a cognitive empathy or emotional empathy where, like, do you use science-based tactics to empathize with someone, or do you do like who you are as a person?
I do who I am as a person. I
Okay.
mean, from a cognitive empathy perspective, um, you know, you're thinking about how they might be feeling, right?
Mhm.
And that is more, I think, you're using like clinical tools to do that.
Okay.
With emotional empathy, I think you're just as a person being like, hopefully like a good person who has empathy, then you can, really not relate to them, but understand that it must be really hard, what they're going through.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it seems like we all need to brush up on our emotional empathy skills.
Exactly. Exactly.
100% agree. But that does bring me to something, and I'm going to have opinions on this, but I'm going to try and keep it to myself. But that you might have heard about, but there are people going around basically trying to encourage us to be less empathetic and less caring about things. Um, Giving them the benefit of the doubt, which I am hesitant to do, but that's my own biases. That's not, uh, you know, any fact-based thing. But I can understand because of the conversation that we just had that they might be concerned that there's basically it's passive agreement or enablement or abandoning growth standards or just growth in general. So I can to a point understand how somebody could arrive at that conclusion. I am very interested before I go any further in what your thoughts are on this, though.
In terms of what aspect?
Just essentially that people are out there trying to encourage people to be less empathetic.
Oh, I've never heard of that before. I don't know why someone would do that. Um, you know, unless they're directly talking, to like an empath, and that's the person who like starts to like take it on so much that they are, like you said earlier, kind of losing themselves, or staying up all night, or can't stop crying about it or whatever. But in general, I mean, empathy is a positive trait. So I don't know why someone would try to talk unless they were like overly empathetic to talk, let people know they shouldn't be demonstrating as much empathy. It's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah. I have an example, right? A personal example where, let's say we're walking on the street and we see a homeless person, right? And then people around me they would like feel bad for he or she, and then like move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where for myself, I would think, at least I always do, where I go into positive action of like how grateful I am that I have a house that I live in.
Yeah.
So do you think like empathy should be given at that point, or like what my thoughts are like it's okay,
Well, I mean, it's definitely okay to have those thoughts. I mean, and
but like, I'm saying like I don't empathize in that sense.
Oh, you don't empathize?
I don't empathize. I'm like,
I would argue that you are, if you're thinking, oh my God, that would be so terrible to have to live on the street or not have a home and be out in the weather and, not eat and everything else that goes along with being homeless. I mean, I think that's demonstrating empathy to just say that's got to suck, to put it mildly. But then, to move on, because I don't know. I don't think you can give every homeless person money. And I've tried to offer homeless people money before and they did not want it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. I offered to give them food. I offered to give them money, and they were just, like in no uncertain terms, let me know if that's not what they wanted. But there's a large degree of mental illness that goes along with being homeless. So you never know how someone's going to react, I guess.
Makes sense.
Back to the people that are encouraging us having less empathy. My instinctual reaction is very visceral, like you are a terrible human being. Like that's where like my immediate reaction was very just highly judgmental, like you're just what is wrong with you? In general, we could use more empathy. There are a few of us, admittedly, and there are times when we could use less empathy, but most of the time we could use more empathy.
I agree.
I think as a society, we're built on empathy, understanding that, hey, I don't want to do bad things because I don't want bad things to be done to me. And I can understand that having those things happen to me would be terrible. So I'm not going to do them to other people. So I don't, I very negatively react to, because there's been like a few articles, I'm not going to name names, but there's been a few, very famous, very wealthy people who are essentially giving speeches uh, about how we should care less. Um,
Is there,
and
is there a point that by caring too much is going to impact your career in some way? Or what
no,
was
Well,
it's
there?
Aaron,
it's that.
also like, does it also I feel like it's a situation like what is the caring for?
So the argument, to my understanding, and I've read transcripts of the speeches, but not seen the speeches live. So maybe they have, a tone. But it's basically that society will can't stand to be empathetic. Like if we're empathetic, we will not like some people have to be uh, let loose and shoved out, and that we as a society are too empathetic, and there should be essentially just people that we don't care about.
Hmm. I mean, I think from like in a business environment that maybe some kind of, hardcore corporate people maybe who've risen to the top might think the empathy is like holding someone back or shows it signifies weakness or something like that. And then could be like, we don't need anyone like that around us who's going to demonstrate those traits. So, I want to surround myself with people who don't maybe have that level of it. Um, I don't know. That's a theory.
That's what I hope it is. That's what I hope it is. Otherwise, like in my head, I'm like, you're a terrible person.
Yeah. Yeah. If someone's telling someone like what a difficult time they're going through and you don't really say anything, you're just like, oh, I mean, that you come off as a terrible person. Because like it's really, it's very cold to not,
Yeah.
to try to like comfort someone or to say, like that's got to be so hard, I'm here if you want to tell me more or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
Oh,
so
on that note, right? I feel like there's a huge difference between men and women
mm,
and how empathy is like shown. Like, would you guys agree? Like, I feel like, or is there a science-based like data where like this says like, oh, like, women feel more empathy towards most of like a lot of things, and then men are like empathized towards like certain things in life.
I'm not familiar with that research, but I would guess that there's been research done on that. Yeah, I'd be really surprised if there wasn't. I mean, and if you want to relate being empathetic to being like nurturing, people tend to think women are more nurturing to, that's a gross generalization, but that women are more nurturing. So maybe then they have more empathy and, um, I don't know if you go back to like, evolution, like would it be more, would you put yourself in more danger if you had empathy versus, just surviving more, it's like being better able to survive if you had less empathy. Like if you go, like what would be what's the purpose of empathy really from an evolutionary standpoint?
It's a great question.
Society, I think, because this is just speculation, but I think it's because as individuals, humans are, mid-tier food chain uh, animals. As a collective, we're fantastic. Obviously top of the food chain, but I think as individuals, we mid-tier. What has advanced us is society and our ability to work and use things as build tools and technologies and all of that. And I think it's very difficult for that advancement to happen without a certain level of trust. And it's very difficult to trust somebody that can't understand what you're going through or won't understand what you're going through. That's just my own theory on it, is like empathy was a necessary evolutionary tool for humanity to rise to the top of the food chain and to develop societies, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true. I'm not a
It's a good theory, though.
anthropologist.
Right. Yeah. Would that be like sociologists, anthropologists? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think it is it is an interesting question to think, how your life would change if you're overly empathic versus having none at all, having no empathy at all. Like, what kind of person would that make you? I mean, I mentioned earlier about antisocial personality disorder and some of the other personality disorders, but I mean, how would that like specifically change your life if you weren't like a criminal? I don't know what the answer is to that. Maybe you'd have less friends. Maybe that would just be something kind of superficial like that. Or maybe it's something deeper.
Yeah. I think that like we don't have time for me to get into this too much, but that's something that I I really have a problem with in terms of our educational institutions and everything is I think one of the things that happened to me and I've seen happen to friends and relatives and everything is we tend to split off people, and we say, oh, this person's special needs or this person's gifted or whatever, and then we separate them entirely from the rest of their cohort or their class or whatever. And I think that it prevents or inhibits development of certain, additional skills. And empathy, I think, is definitely part of that. Again, I know I'm putting it into the skill category right now,
Yeah.
but we like what you have is you have, and I think our society is full of it, is you have a lot of very smart people who can't and struggle to connect to everybody else because they never developed the skills to understand where other people were coming from. And because they were isolated, they never saw that uh, um, that interchange and what life is like for your average person. And so they develop what I believe is a disconnect where they're just kind of saying, okay, I'm right because I'm smart because of all of this. And you get to the point where people are encouraging others to have less empathy. Um, and I think that that's problematic, and it's the same with when they separate special needs kids too much. Like if they're a danger to other people, I totally understand that. But the realities to me of society is we all have to interact with each other. Whether we're super empathetic, not empathetic, whether we're geniuses or not. That's something that we have to do. And what I see that's very concerning and I think speaks to this idea that we should have more empathy is that we get very siloed at an early age, and then it prevents us from developing empathy for other groups and kind of only being able to consider uh, the the well-being and the emotions of people that we've already interacted with. I don't know if that makes any sense, and it's entirely a theory.
Yeah, I mean, well, I have a couple of thoughts. One is that with empathy, I mean, we kind of went back to like brain development and stuff like that. And when you see someone going through something hard and you can either can't connect or can connect, then like, what does that say about you as a person? What does it mean to you and for your life and for those around you? And it's something, again, there's some controversy and we've even talked about it during this podcast, like, can it be learned, or how much can it be learned, or, is it like you have it or you don't, or, but, even though I like think it's innate, at the same time, when you talked about it being like more of a skill, I think it's something that you're taught by, say, like your parents, if you come from like a good stable home or whatever, however you want to define that. That's something like, when you're a little kid and maybe you say a kid like throws a rock at someone and the other person starts crying, and then like maybe a parent will sit them down and be like, how would you feel if someone did that to you? That that's why you shouldn't do it, because it's hurtful to someone. And why don't you try to think about if someone threw a rock at you? So it is learned to a certain extent, I think. But if you don't have it to begin with, then you're not going to pick up that skill. I don't think you don't have the ability to, because it's just missing.
And on that note, how
question? I kind of went on a tangent.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, on that note, like, what would be a skill for someone to, show empathy? Like, how can someone be better at it, or like, what can someone do?
If they're not good at expressing empathy,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something, if they went to see someone in the mental health field, like a therapist or, whoever, that's something they could work on it. Now, whether it would be successful or not, I mean, it wouldn't be successful with a psychopath. Not that they usually go to therapy, but, but say just like, a higher functioning, quote unquote, normal person, maybe it would be successful. I mean, I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth here.
Yeah.
But it's worth trying. I mean, but I think you have to ask yourself, like, would it even bother? Why would someone go to therapy if they don't have empathy? Does it bother them that they don't have it? Or is it maybe because it's like wrecking relationships, or do they not care if they have it or not? Because then why would they go seek help for it, or care?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I feel like with my partner, I go through the habit of exercising empathy more often. Like, she has made me more empathetic. And it's largely just because she's trying to explain her own high level of empathy. And then like that provides me a connection to, the situation. So I feel like it, for me at least, it can be developed, but like you were saying, you have to want to do it. And I will say this to promote people to want to do it. One, if you form better relationships with empathy, like hands down, I think you form better relationships if you have empathy. And two, totally having nothing to do with anything else that we were talking about, but something that I found out not too long ago. If you're like using Chat GPT or whatever, and you're trying to put in a prompt, I've found that if you lay out like the emotional criteria behind the prompt, you get a better response that's closer to what you're looking for. So empathy helps you relate to AI, which is very weird.
Interesting. I never thought about that. But, and like personally, talking about empathy, there's situations where, I think I have a lot of empathy for people. I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I would hope, I'd hope I have empathy. But, certainly like in my personal life, there's situations where I feel very empathetic towards someone. And then maybe in another situation, I'm like, they they caused that themselves. So, whatever, that's their own fault. And I don't have a lot of empathy for them, which, not to sound like a cold, horrible person, but, I think there's different situations where you will be more empathetic versus others where you will not be.
That's true. That's true. Well, we are like pushing the border of overtime, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface on this, which really sucks. We got to revisit this conversation because it's such a good conversation. Yeah, but thank you both. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Dr. Tilden, for joining us. We have to have this conversation again. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all of those fun promo things. Uh, See you next time.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.